Okay, folks, I think we're going to go ahead and get started as the majority of folks we expect to have here today have arrived. There's the last one. Because we have a few new members on the Certified Burn Manager Advisory Committee, we're going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves first, and then we'll go around with the rest of the committee. For those of you who are not on the committee, we won't be doing introductions for the whole group. We'll just be doing those who are on the committee. And we ask that if you're not on the committee, you hold your comments for the public comment period. So with that, we'll start with Erin Krikova. And if you want to just tell us your name, the organization, or what sector you might consider yourself to be representing, that would be probably sufficient.
Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, everyone. My name is Aaron Krikova. I'm with the Rogue Valley Prescribed Burn Association down here in Medford.
Okay, and Mike Betchtold will be next.
Morning, Mike Bechtel. I'm a retired BLM forester, and now I'm president of a partnership down here, Forest Lake County Forest Health Partnership. And I was grandfathered in as a certified burn manager. And I just want to commend all the work that you guys have done so far. It's tremendous.
Thanks, Mike. Let's go to Amanda next.
Hey guys, Amanda Sullivan-Asker, Associated Oregon Loggers. I'm a committee member.
Katie Sauerbray.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Katie Sauerbray. I'm the Fire Program Director for the Nature Conservancy in Oregon, and a committee member.
John Punches.
Hey everybody, I'm with Oregon State University Extension Forestry and also a committee member.
Vernon Stearns, who has replaced Daniel Dyer as an ex officio member.
Hi, good morning. Vernon Stearns here with the BIA Northwest Region.
I see that our chair of the committee, Colby Drake, just joined, so he can go ahead and introduce himself. Okay, let's go to John Punches while Colby's getting himself logged in.
So I introduced myself just a second ago, but John Punches, Oregon State University.
Sorry about that, John. I was distracted there for a moment. Colby Drake, can you introduce yourself?
Can you guys hear me all right?
There you are.
Yeah, just doing introductions. I take it. My name's Colby Drake. I'm the Natural Resources Department Manager for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and part of the Certified Burn Manager Program. Thank you.
Okay, great, Colby. Thanks for introducing yourself and welcome to everyone who's here today. I'm not sure we mentioned it already, but I'll mention it now that we are recording this meeting. It is a public meeting. And we're going to go ahead and proceed through the agenda. Apologies in advance for just a moment. My computer is updating itself here in the ODF office, which happens when we come into the office sometimes. So it's actually not available to me at the moment, but I will be sharing some information through my computer screen later. So I'm going to go off the cuff a little bit here for a moment, just talking about our certifications to date. The majority of the folks who have been certified at this point have been brought in under previous certification. So that means that they were already a type 2 burn boss or had experience leading burns in the private industry. We have 2 people who have officially made it through both the training and field certification. There's technically 3 who have finished everything, but the third person hasn't had their book submitted yet. So we know that they're done, but they haven't actually gotten their ID number yet. And so that's really great to see the progress of the program, both through the training and certification process, as well as bringing in people with that previous experience. So we have 42 people right now currently certified in the state of Oregon. And of those, as I said, 2 of them have made it all the way through the entire process. In terms of the geographic diversity of those who are certified, we have folks from, and not just geographic, but also what kind of sectors they represent in Oregon. We have folks who represent both current and former federal employment. So folks who either used to work for the federal government or actually currently work for the federal government, but also want to do burning on their own time using this certification. We have folks from industry, some smaller landowners. We have folks who are working with the nonprofit sector. Do we need to mute somewhere here? Folks want to double check that they're muted. Okay, good. I'm not sure where that noise is coming from. So we've got a fairly good representation across the state. I think what our next steps would be in terms of how we handle all these folks who are certified and connecting them with those who need training and are looking for opportunities to learn would be creating a kind of a website or a hub of some kind. There was discussion with the Oregon Prescribed Fire Council about having them host something. We've talked about doing it at ODF as well. But one of the things I'd like to put out there is just a point to welcome input on from committee members would be how or whether we want to find a way to represent all of these folks on a voluntary basis so that they can be reached. And I think some of you who are here have certifications, so you might consider the extent to which you would want to be reached out to yourselves. I think most of the people here probably are willing to because they're part of the training program, but we're trying to figure out how to do this because I don't know that they don't have anything in Washington to this end, but we need to find a way to get folks their names out there. And so this was something that I decided to add as a question because there's not a whole lot more to say other than the number of people and kind of the backgrounds that they represent. But do folks on the committee have any thoughts on how we network and provide opportunities for folks to reach each other for training? Go ahead, John.
So one of the things that I've done is as OSU has delivered the 3 or 4 day course, the 24-hour course, um, all of my students to date have asked me to like share the names from that class with each other so they can coordinate internally. So if somebody's doing a burn, they've got opportunities there, and then they have the instructor information. I've been wondering if it would be possible for ODF, or maybe this is something that this Prescribed Fire Council will do, is to just create a listserv where anybody who goes through that training course and then needs to go on and have the opportunities for mentored experiences like we could simply make those opportunities known. Right now, short of creating another database, I don't have a way to reach out to everybody. I could do that internally with the people that I've taught, but then I wouldn't necessarily have other people who are taught by other persons. That makes sense. So just wondering, I don't know if ODF wants to do that or if we really kind of need to lean on Prescribed Fire Council, but it seems like that could be one step. It's just to have one way that we could send a note and said, hey, I've got this burn and we have opportunities for 1 or 2 CBMs to get some mentoring.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, John. To me, it seems like something that the Prescribed Fire Council would be well suited for, just because they really are that convening body and are a networking hub. On the ODF side, it would be creating a voluntary sort of provider list for those who are actually certified already versus, more of a networking group of folks who want to burn. Looks like Mike has his hand up. Yeah, Mike, what do you have?
So as I reviewed the material and the opportunity for CBMs to get experience, is it, can they go to the federal agencies and get some of that experience through the federal agencies, i.e. the Forest Service, BLM, because they do a lot of underburn, prescribed burns, whereas on the non-industrial, they don't do as many. So is it crossing some kind of line or protocol if they were to get some of their experience on federal land, prescribed burns?
So one of the issues is that there is some overlap between the certified burn manager and the NWCG burn boss qualifications, as well as the other qualifications under them. But there's a fair amount of need for agreements and other forms of coverage for liability. Like, for example, the Nature Conservancy and the TREX program have been providing that overlapping opportunity, but it's still not necessarily on the federal side. It's through that program, they've been providing CBM training opportunities through TREX, which is fantastic use of that program, but those folks they're generally already RXB2 or type 2 burn boss, and then they also hold the certified burn manager qualification. So there's definitely want to see more folks getting experience on burns for just the basic level of, just experiential training, but it's harder to get the certification training on federal burns, just unless there happens to be that real high level of overlap. I don't know if that makes sense, if I'm explaining that well.
And a quick question. So the
Yeah.
intent here for the conversation we're focused around, is it specifically around getting the kind of trainees or the folks that are working through the program experience? Or is the question larger than that of, do we want to voluntarily post the information about the list of certified bird managers so landowners, et cetera, can reach out?
Yeah, I think it's both because there's folks looking for training opportunities and they need a qualified CBM to work under. And then there's folks who are just interested in finding a CBM or want to know who's qualified and wants to provide the service. And not everyone who becomes a CBM actually wants to be a service provider or even be known for having it.
Right.
So
Yeah,
that's why it needs to be voluntary. Yeah.
exactly. That was going to be my comment. It is perhaps there's when you finally put in your application that includes your certified book and the fee and all the other things, maybe there's a checkbox on the form that says like, yes, I want to be publicly my information publicly available, or no, I don't. And that way it's an opt-in or out, because I do strongly believe that that should be a voluntary thing. I don't think all the CBM's names should be out there if they don't want them.
Yeah, you're thinking pretty much the same way as my boss and my boss's boss. Actually, they both said the same thing, that we should add a checkbox to our application form. So I think we're going to do that. We still have folks we need to reach out to, which are basically all the folks that are certified, to find out if they want their names added. But yeah, that all syncs up. I think next would be Aaron.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. First, do we know how many people have gone through the course and are thereby looking for training opportunities?
We know roughly how many people have gone through the course, but unfortunately, it doesn't sync up directly to training opportunities. I would give you a rough number of about the same number of people have field certification books as those who have certification. So we have about 40 people out there looking for opportunities, and they have 3 years to complete their field certification. And each of those people needs 3 training burns. So that adds up pretty quickly. And any opportunity that's out there that's a CBM burn, we want to try to get a trainee on if the person who's leading it is open to that.
Excellent. I think the Oregon Prescribed Fire Council sending out a listserv or having a listserv to share opportunities is a good idea. I could also see a situation where that would then mean someone hosting a burn would get like 10 or 12 emails from folks requesting a training opportunity, and then it's kind of on them to field all those emails and then make a decision around that, which I could see becoming kind of sticky. And I also would say that maybe we could just suggest to the trainees to reach out to their local prescribed burn associations or something like that and kind of put the aegis on them to try and find an opportunity to get involved in their local PBAs or whichever groups are doing burns in their area. And then through that, they would develop the relationships that would give them the information and the opportunity to work on their trainings.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think in some places, folks, they don't have anything going on locally yet, although that's changing rapidly as I think we have, what, like 10 prescribed burn associations forming in Oregon at one time, it seems. So I think that makes sense to urge people to make contact locally. This has been going round and round the council for a while in terms of how do you get information out about burn opportunities. And there's been a calendar idea thrown around, but then it's gets back to who's going to maintain the calendar. And so a lot of it has to do with who's going to do the care and feeding of the hub of whatever kind it might be. And that's part of why thinking that just populating those who want voluntarily to make themselves known for training opportunities is one step, but then, there's the burning. And are there burns happening that aren't being CBM led that could? I mean, that's another question, right? We'll go to Amanda next before we move on to the next topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, it sounds like the question is primarily focused around connecting trainers and certified or, people that can train and then like trainees. But, we're also thinking a lot about how folks who get that CBM are able to notify, landowners of that and of that, additional protection that they have and qualification that they've gone through. And we think a lot about like our professional logger directory that AOL houses since we manage that program. And obviously we've got the cards that folks are going to have in that, a landowner could check, but having a like government repository or directory, I think is probably going to be really helpful for people too, as this gets up and running. And, people are trying to find CBMs to do their burning and want to verify that people, have that. Just want to highlight that might be something for us to think about too, not necessarily just the benefit of having that listserv for connecting the trainers and the trainees, but also just folks who want to find somebody to do a burn on their property that has that additional qualification. So not sure if that's something also that you guys are thinking about at ODF, but definitely something we're thinking about and how we can perhaps help, but AOL can't hold that directory. So we can add like a additional kind of area, button to toggle on and off for like our members that have profiles within our database. And somebody could click that, but then it's like, I guess anybody that can click it. And so then it'd be nice to be able to send people to someplace else that, can verify that they are a CBM, or that, because we have individual profiles, so people can look at that level, not just the company. But anyways, just another thing that we're thinking about for our members in the space.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense because then if someone doesn't maintain their qualification through continuing it and burning and it expires and they're no longer certified, we could just pull them off that list and we're going to be the ones who know better than anyone else. So I think this is all really good. I mean, it's just supporting what we were thinking internally already, but really just want to highlight that I want to make sure I'm not, I don't know why I was unmuted there. So yeah, this is just verifying that we really want to do this ourselves already, but we wanted to run that through the committee first. I didn't get a chance to share the agenda for this meeting before we got started, but I want to do that real quick so that you guys know where we're at. Coming up. Okay. So yeah, and we're actually kind of running into our, not just kind of, but we are running into our public comment period. So we're going to start that now. And then we'll go into updates on curriculum and the training delivery. So folks from the public who have joined today, this is your time to comment. We'll give an extra few minutes since we ran about 6 minutes over into that time frame as needed. So is anyone here who's joining, who's not on the committee, have any comments they want to make today?
Good morning, CBM folks. This is Will Brendecki. I'm representing myself as a private landowner. Can you hear me okay, Amanda?
Loud and clear.
I just appreciate being able to attend. I don't. I did want to offer up. I appreciate sort of the previous comments that I, as a private landowner on the east side, having gone through the CBM training curriculum, I'm a trainee. I'm very much interested in prescribed fire on my property, and would just want to offer up the opportunity to integrate with folks here or others that are looking for a training opportunity. I obviously can't lead my own burns, but I have some um, prescribed fire objectives and fuels reduction around a cabin. Um, and I guess I just wanted to make that comment. Nothing really substantive to make comment on, other than really looking forward to being part of this program, um, and wanted to let this committee know that as a private landowner, 120 acres, complete 100% in holding on federal land in Grant County, kind of over by Austin Junction, if people know where that's at, off Highway 26. I'm interested in some fuels reduction, and it's an interesting piece of land with a variety of biophysical environments and plant associations, aspects, topography, and holdings, in roads to work off of. And I've already kind of communicated with the Malheur National Forest, looking for using the Wyden Amendment when they finish the Austin project. But I can't tell you how long that's going to take till they sign that NEPA. But yeah, other than that, thanks for this program, and I'm really excited to see it grow. I know there's some challenges you guys are working through, but as a landowner, I'm um, an advocate and an ally in Grant County. So I'll stop there.
That's great. Thanks, Will. Maybe we'll get to see some of what Mike was talking about with the overlap with federal lands and some of the opportunities they might bring. Do we have anyone else who'd like to comment today? Okay, well, hearing nothing, then I guess that would mean we went from being 6 minutes behind to 6 minutes ahead. With that, we're going to move into the curriculum updates and training delivery. And I'm gonna ask John Punches to join in on this a little bit more, just because he's probably got more time under his belt delivering this training than anyone else in the group. But I'll just start off by kind of giving an update on where things are at. So We've got two primary training providers at this time, Oregon State University Extension and Lane Community College through Mike Beasley. So Mike Beasley is a CBM, and we have a training provider agreement directly with him as an individual, but he teaches his class at Lane Community College. He's also become involved with the Willamette Ignitions Network, which is a new nonprofit delivering training, mostly NWCG training, and they're based in Eugene. And so he'll be delivering CBM with that group, although maybe also through Lane Community College again this fall. But we've now had two deliveries at Lane Community College. Both were offered as part of the fall term in the 2023 and 2024. So those were offered as part of an existing class that goes throughout the fall term. And then in addition to that, we've had deliveries in one in Central Point, one in Corvallis, one in Roseburg, and two in Sisters. And the last one in Sisters just wrapped up, a week or two ago. And so where we're at with the curriculum, specifically with OSU, and this is because they are actually publishing their curriculum, as we went and I attended the delivery in Sisters as well as participated in the delivery in Roseburg so that I could get really familiar with how it was rolling out. And then also not only through delivering it myself, but also through being there for the whole class, that was done in Sisters. And I was able to get a sense for how we could make some changes to make it a more effective delivery. So we added some additional interactive exercises for the students to do in groups. And then we also added some sand table exercises. And we just kind of reoriented the flow of the content a little bit. So it was primarily John Punches, Chris Adlam, and myself sitting down and going through what OSU had put together and then just making a bunch of small changes. And I think, John, this is where I'm going to call on you to pipe in a little bit about how the last training went. I got a pretty great email from you about how it went, but I was thinking, if you don't mind, maybe you could share with the group about what it was like. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so he can show up here. But yeah, if you want to let us know how the last delivery went and how that rolled out relative to the previous deliveries, that would be great.
Sure. We had really exceptional feedback from the trainees involved in the course. I think that's the most telling component. We refined it according to like the order that you had suggested. And then I think really the big changes in there is that we had been, because it was very much pilot development of the course prior to this, we've been doing a lot of this as kind of field-based components simply because it was easier to organize for those initial courses. This one, we invested the time, like you say, into creating more group exercises and building the sand table exercises. Those were very effective. And so we have exercises now that deal with identifying landowner objectives. We have exercises that deal with really going in and evaluating a burn plan. So we have a burn plan that was specifically created to have some really good stuff and some stuff that needs to be refined. So like really getting CBMs to think critically about that and identify where maybe a plan that they've received would need to be modified to be more appropriately implemented. So really getting them to dig in. That works really well in small groups. We built the sand table exercises with a couple of different scenarios. One of the really great recommendations we got back was to add a third brief one where it's just like they should recognize that they are out of prescription and shouldn't even start burning. So we'll add that into the next round. We did just a half day in the field, so to speak, with a landowner to really like get that. When we actually had a landowner who's very keen on doing prescribed fire on their property and wants CBMs to lead it, really get into the discussion there so we could look at his property, think about his objectives, and really get people thinking about how to engage in that landowner interface kind of component. We spent time outdoors doing fuel measurement activities using the ODF simple fuel measurement thing and then bringing them back to classroom to do the calculations. We spent a lot of time showing people where they could get weather and really challenging them to think about how they incorporate that into their planning processes. So just a lot of engagement. It makes for, it's a lot of work on the part of instructors. And it's kind of hard to like write up exactly how to do this, but we're really close. So I felt like leaving out of there that if I had a good, like maybe a solid week with nothing else interrupting me, I could really get to the point where that curriculum was ready to go. I don't get a solid week of uninterrupted time, so it'll take much longer than that. But it feels like we're really close in that, and we've just been making progress as we go through each of these iterations. I'm thinking that if I can pull it off, I may offer it again this fall in northeastern Oregon, and hopefully at that point really have a good solid curriculum to go from. But the team that's been working in Central Oregon now, we've taught together a couple of us taught together now 3 times. So that team is really kind of ready and raring to go. They don't want to necessarily do it every year, but I'm hoping I can snag a couple of them to come over and help me in Northeast. It helps a lot to have team members who are already familiar with the process, so that you're not trying to train somebody new in it. But yeah, it's coming together. It's just a lot of engagement from the students, and I think this is really positive. That probably one of the most consistent uh, elements of feedback throughout the process was people saying, "Oh my goodness, I never realized that I should be thinking about that." And that's like, I see why that's so important. So knowing that people are having their eyes open, I think really says, this is exactly why we want to be doing this program. We want to open people's eyes, both to the opportunities, but also to, how we can use this to mitigate risk and how we can do this to make sure that we're maintaining our social license to burn.
Yeah, that's great feedback, John. And I think that also kind of brings up a question for me for the group, which would be, where are we not delivering this training that we should be? We've covered Southwest Oregon pretty well. We've covered Central Oregon pretty well. And just by nature of having 3 deliveries in the Willamette Valley, you kind of have to say at least the Southern Willamette Valley has been covered pretty well. There have been conversations about Klamath Lake. Mike, I see you raise your hand. Why don't you go ahead?
So as again, I was asked to be president of the Klamath Lake Forest Health Partnership, and there's been a lot of interest. I'm sure, John, you've talked to Jason Pettigrew, Leanne Vandenberg. There's a lot of interest on the Fremont Wainema, in Holdings, in Lakeview and Klamath on delivering a training. And I'm not sure who you'll get. You'll get some landowners probably, but there's a lot of interest down here, and that's one of the reasons I thought, well, I'll just throw my name into the hat on the advisory board application. So yeah, there's a lot of interest down here in this region.
And I could
Yeah,
be
and one of
convinced
the
to come
things
down there and teach there. I mean, if there's more demand there than there is in Northeast, I don't have like a list of people saying they want it Northeast. It just, we've got development of a prescribed burn association going on up here, so it seems relatively timely, but maybe we need to make the next one down in your area rather than up in my area. So.
Well, I guess you brought up a good point. I could reach out to some of the key advocates for this program and see how big of audience we would have, John, before you make that commitment. But I've heard there's interest, but we need to generate a list to see just how many people are interested.
And if I might, I'll just observe that in all of the other courses that OSU has been involved with, we've had participation from around the state. So our most recent one in Central Oregon had folks from all over the state. And so sometimes what really is valuable is just having a convenient kind of central location to offer that. But we could certainly offer one down there. We've done it a couple of times in Sisters because Eric Metzger is the ODF person there, really trying to pull together that PBA. And he says, I've got people specific here that I want to target. but we opened it up to everybody across the state. So it doesn't have to be just an audience of folks, local to Klamath and Lake counties. But if you've got some key people there, we can like make sure they're involved, and then we can fill in the class with other people because there's demand and people are willing to come and stay and participate.
No, I think that's a great point that you make, John, that just because we deliver it there doesn't mean all the people have to come from there. And in my conversations with Jason Pettigrew, he's been trying to kind of gauge the experience base there and how much people are ready for it. But again, we don't have to have the entirety of the class come from that geography just to deliver it there. And that has been a place on our radar that we know we want to go to that has so much going on in terms of cross-boundary work and burning on private lands that it's probably really a good time to do it, even if the local base of folks ready for it might not be to what we would want to justify putting on a whole class. Because I think that was some of his concern, was that he didn't know if we could justify putting on the whole class just for who needs it down there. But there's enough demand across the state, people will travel for it. Other comments on training delivery and where we see a need to fill?
I guess maybe just my one observation is that, according to the rule, it's 24 hours of training. Delivering it in 24 hours, like 3 8-hour days, is really overwhelming for the students. So the last two classes that I've done, we've stretched it out to 3.5 days. So we call it 4 days, but it's really 3.5. I actually think that if I teach it again, I'm going to argue it should be closer to actually like 4 days. So we can give a little bit more time in there just for people to engage more, to have conversations, to spend a little bit more time on some of the activities and just get to know each other, just to kind of slow down that pace and allow for a little more sync time. Because we can certainly deliver the material bam, bam, bam in 3 8-hour days, but I don't know that we really get good learning in that environment. So spacing it out a little bit more, taking that extra day, providing some more time in there, I think is really valuable. So not a change to the curriculum, just a little bit about the pacing at which it's delivered.
Yeah, that's really great feedback, and this is part of why we're so grateful to partner with OSU on this, because you think about these things in terms of learners and how they absorb material and adult education. And certainly the class was never prescribed as it had to be in 3 days. It's always been 24 hours. That's what the curriculum and the instructional guide indicates, as hours of instruction as opposed to days of instruction. So technically, you could stretch it out to 5 days if you really wanted to. And you can teach more hours too. You don't have to limit it to 24. It has to have a minimum of 24. I suppose if you were to double that, folks might start asking about whether they should be spending that much of their time that way. But I know the value of those side conversations and the sharing. Some of that will happen after hours, but you can't really depend on that, and making time and space for that as part of the delivery, I think, is hugely important. After having just spent a couple days with the wonderful people of the Oregon Prescribed Fire Council, which I count myself amongst, I saw that too. It was part of the way they structured the field trip was very spacious, and it allowed for a lot of really great conversations and sharing. And I don't think that would have happened if they crammed it in. So thinking about how we space out the material and give time for folks to absorb is so important. We always joke about drinking from the fire hose, but the reality is that's not the best way to get information retained and processed and made most useful for folks in terms of their application. Other folks want to have any feedback or thoughts on curriculum and training delivery, especially in terms of how you're if you're receiving folks from the classroom training and field certification, and seeing anything that needs to be attended to. Oh, Mike, go ahead.
So I don't know if this is off the topic, but when I was reading the template this is based on an experience. And John, I don't know, you mentioned that in your last training, an individual said, well, I never knew that. So when I was looking through the checklist for a template, is one of the contacts the power companies. And the reason I asked that is that we've had experience with the large KV lines on prescribed burns where Pacific Power actually sent a representative down because their lines were arcing. And after that experience, we added contact to the power companies. And it's just a curriculum question. Is that on the checklist? I know smoke management and safety and all those, but after that experience, we added contacting power companies to the checklist. So I don't know if that's off curriculum topic, but I noticed that when I went through the material.
So I don't recall it being anywhere specifically in the template for the burn plan. But we certainly talk about that sort of issue. So that if you're burning near a road, thinking about contacting road department, things of that nature during the course, and then making sure that people know that those should be added to your contact list. So we don't have it specifically. It isn't in the ODF template per se, but it is part of our curriculum.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it does prompt just consideration of whether or not we need to go back and make sure that that's listed specifically beyond the training, but actually in a go, no go or in the notifications. Because the program requires that all adjacent landowners be notified, and that prompts a conversation. But that doesn't necessarily say the power company, because the power company is not necessarily a landowner. They have this right of way. And so, and I'm used to dealing with this, Mike, from my own experience, although I haven't actually had the arcing happen. I'd like to say we've prevented it by offsets from our burns. Um, but I think that's a good thing to go back and take a look at. The one thing to remember is the instructional guide and the burn plan templates are living documents. Those aren't the kinds of things we have to send back through the Board of Forestry or something like that. We can make those changes through this committee. So, certainly we can take a look at that and make recommendations to add things through this group. So, Mike, if you want to do that, and you and John both want to take a look at that and just double check that we have covered that. And I'm not talking about just in the training, but in the actual templates, because the training is getting to the new people, but it doesn't get, we don't catch the people that are being grandparented into the program, which we like to assume they've been thinking about that, but that's why we have go, no go checklists so that we don't forget things.
I think it'd be an excellent addition to, we've got a spot in the template in the notification section for the agency. It's the right-hand column in that little spot. And there's a couple of blanks in there, and we certainly could add into that power company / road department as applicable or something like that, just to get people to think that. And then I really think I like the idea of adding something to that nature in the go, no go checklist, a pre-post checklist, to make sure that people are really making sure that they've got those considerations covered before they're putting the fire on the ground.
Yeah, that's a great question. Other thoughts or questions from the committee? I think one thing that I'll note is just that to some extent where we're delivering this is relative to where ODF protected lands are. And so, I think we're ending up in places where there's more ODF protection, not necessarily getting as much interest from where like the Rangeland Fire Protection Associations are in operation. But yeah, just keep us posted as there are interest in delivery, and we can try to coordinate that, us meaning ODF and working with OSU primarily. I don't know, does anyone have anything else on this? Because otherwise we're going to end up breaking a little bit early before we go into our next section. Okay. With that, we're going to take a 15-minute break. We'll be back. We'll just say back at 10:05, and then I'll give a presentation at that point on the prescribed fire liability pilot program. And then we'll go into the rest of our agenda, which actually I'll go ahead and put back up on the screen so you guys know what's coming. And we'll see you all at 10:05. All right, folks, it's 10:05, so we're going to get back into our meeting agenda, and I'm going to go ahead and present on the prescribed fire liability pilot program, give a quick PowerPoint, and then we'll open it up for discussion after that. Okay, so I'm going to go through introduction to the program, how to get enrolled, eligible claims, what the website looks like, and then we'll have questions after that. This gives us a kind of a picture of what the timeline looks like for this program. It was originally introduced in the 2023 legislative session under Senate Bill 80. And then there was a fix-it bill for it under House Bill 4016. The reason for that was that the original bill did not include a limit for how much per claim, per incident or occurrence could be made. It referred to the Oregon Tort Claims Act for that, but that didn't actually address it. So they went back and made it specific to a $1 million per occurrence. And then they also included an ask for a fiscal request for a wildfire investigator. And then by September of last year, we had completed the rulemaking. There was a small group convened to that end that worked last summer to put those rules together. At the same time that we were working on the rules, we were also working on the website as a hub to take in all the information from folks wanting to register their burns. We modeled that after California's website. It's not exactly the same. It doesn't require quite as much information as California's site does, but we consulted with them quite a bit on how they organize their program and utilized their prior experience with that. And so we went ahead and implemented the program then as of end of October. That was when you could first start registering your burns. And we actually registered the first burn in the system as part of the Roseburg CBM training delivery. And the anticipated program sunset in the absence of any renewal will be January 2nd of 2028, because this is a pilot program. So this gives us just some information on what is required in order to be eligible for the program. So the burn has to be enrolled in the system before burning. That means you can't go burn, then have something happen, then decide to go register the unit so that it gets covered. You have to put it in before you burn. And then the burn has to be supervised by the appropriate party. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. If a burn plan is required, then it has to be received and approved prior to burning or reviewed in the case of ODS, since we don't actually approve burn plans. Any required burn permits have to be received before burning. It has to follow applicable laws related to burning. And that includes submitting for a PDM, making required notifications, et cetera. The claimant cannot be willful, malicious, or negligent in the origin or subsequent spread of the burn. So that means Somebody can't come along and light off of your control line just to burn their barn down and then come after the state for it. But that means that the burn also can't be a result of willful, malicious, or negligence in the folks who are operating, putting the burn on. So just to be clear, the use of the terms willful, malicious, and negligent in this particular case this does not indicate a gross negligence standard of care for liability. And I double checked on this because anytime you see those words in rule around that's related to liability, it generally brings up that question. But the word or is actually really important here because if it's malicious or negligent, then it's not that you're not showing that you actually intended to be negligent, willfully negligent. So you actually have to combine willfulness and negligence to get to that point. And thanks to Tim Holschbach for educating me on that. I asked him because I thought maybe this was something that was getting us to gross negligence, but he helped me understand that. And then the eligible damage on the claim as a result of the burn, and the claim was submitted in time. So if any of these conditions are not met, the burn does not technically have a liability protection because the claims wouldn't meet the reimbursement criteria as required by law. So this is what we mean when we're talking about the appropriate party. It must be conducted or supervised by ODF, that's state forester, FPA, such as DFPA, RFPA, Rangeland Fire Protection Association, and then certified burn manager, and then cultural fire practitioner. So those are the parties that are considered appropriate for supervising a burn that could have a claim made under this program. So permits and burn plans have to be received before burning, and ODF, again, we review, but we don't necessarily approve plans, and this is just as required. But one of the following must review and approve the plan before the burn is conducted. The responsibilities of the applicant are to make sure that the burn meets criteria to allow claims to be submitted, that they complete the online form. If it's required, they upload a copy of the burn plan. They send burn permits to ODF as they are required, and then report the burn as complete on the website. ODF is responsible for monitoring the website and reviewing applications for completeness, also tracking incoming burn permits. As far as claims go, it's important to note that nothing in this program prohibits other litigation or cost recovery proceedings. So essentially what that means is someone can make a claim to this and they can also litigate outside of that. So it's important to note that because it doesn't put any limitations on that. And the claimants can be anyone who suffered eligible damage or ODF, FPA, or an agency to reimburse the actual cost for suppression. So the eligibility criteria for damages is also defined in legislation. So here they are. Economic or property damage that occurs outside of a planned unit, property damage, personal injury and death, smoke damage to real property other than agricultural or natural resources. That's important to note. Losses, physical injury or death resulting from vehicle accidents caused by smoke. And so that means that really only smoke damage to real property is covered here. Recoverable suppression expenses incurred by the state forester or FPA as described in ORS 477068 and subject to the provisions of 477120. So ineligible damages include, and I'm sorry, I should note that to go back, the way I read this was that it's really that agricultural and natural resources are not included, but losses, physical injury, and death resulting from vehicle accidents solely caused by smoke are. The case law in Oregon is kind of dubious on that, but that doesn't mean that claims cannot be made to this for those things. So just to be clear, here are the only things that are ineligible. Smoke damage to agricultural crops or natural resources, claims for damages within the planned burn unit for trees, carbon stocks, or other assets. And then damages resulting from anything that wasn't enrolled prior to burning occurring. This is what the process looks like for submitting a claim. So ODF receives the claim via email. The certifier investigates to ensure that the burn liability coverage and eligibility criteria are met. Then ODF sends eligible claims to DCBS, the Department of Consumer and Business Services, and that's where they're processed. So ODF is really the person who, or the entity who is interacting directly with the claimants on the eligibility side. And then DCBS reviews ODF's claim for eligibility certification, and then we'll issue the reimbursement. So DCBS is really on the adjustment side of things in terms of, you know, the value of something that's being claimed for. ODF is on the eligibility side of deciding whether or not the burn met the criteria. So we have two different roles here, and we have an agreement in place for this. And then all claims, even those that are ineligible, will be saved in a centralized location. And then ODF is the notifier to claimants to let them know the result of their claim. So we have a website. It's a centralized hub of program information, and it includes FAQs, the electronic enrollment application, burn completion reporting, and there's also an interactive map where you can look at all the enrolled burns and their status. And you'll find that at the same website as you find the Certified Burn Manager program. And with that, I'm putting Ryan Miller's information up here because he's actually the administrator of the program. I'm just presenting on it here today. I do receive emails inquiring about the program, and you will find me answering to those, but it's not technically under my purview and my position. So if you have more questions, you can reach out to him. You can ask me too. I'm happy to answer them. And with that, I will take questions here. Or we can open it up for some discussion.
So Amanda, one of the things that came up in the last iteration when I was teaching CBM as I presented on this was the observation that because in essence, if you're burning forest land, it has to be under, either a cultural practitioner or a CBM. There are forest lands that fall outside ODF protection districts far enough that they wouldn't we wouldn't have our CBM status there because CBM status, as you know, applies to those protection districts in the 8th mile thereof. And so there's that liability program. There's significant portions, not huge, but significant portions of the state that are forested, where people may be considering burns that don't have the benefit of this program. And so there was just questions like, is there any intent by the legislature to open it up farther, to make some way that can be adjusted? Maybe we don't want to, but I'm just like passing on that observation and that concern that a lot of these folks are burning, they're Willamette Valley, things like that, where there's areas that just, they fall between the cracks of all of the CBM related efforts.
Yeah, you're pointing out a very important hole, I guess, in the landscape across Oregon in terms of liability protection and availability of the CBM program's applicability. And until we have a statewide program, or unless a statewide program ends up being implemented, there's only so much we can do about that. Now, it's notable that the liability pilot covers a lot more than ODF protected land. Okay, it covers forest protective associations, RFPAs, and cultural fire practitioners. And that's a very open-ended definition, and it doesn't have a limitation. So essentially what this means is there is the availability of the liability pilot to those who are not CBMs, and that extends the landscape of protection quite significantly, actually, but it's specific to whether or not a cultural fire practitioner is overseeing the burn, say, for example, or an RFPA is in charge of it. And we don't have a whole lot to say about what those requirements are because we are not in charge of that. We're in charge of CBM And then, of course, we have a strong relationship with and oversight to some extent with the FPA situation. But similarly, there's like you said, and as I have acknowledged, there's it's not an equitable access landscape when it comes down to it. And as to what to do about that, that's a good question. Maybe Katie can offer up something. Your turn, Katie.
I was going to take us in a different direction. Is that okay?
That's fine, yeah.
Great. So one of the kind of requirements or the things you just went through is that the burn permit is uploaded. Is it okay for that to be done after the fact? And the reason I ask is because oftentimes you won't get the burn permit until the morning of the burn on site with ODF. And then a follow-up to that is I've experienced a bit of inconsistency among different ODF districts about whether or not they feel they need to give you a permit based on if you're in or out of fire season. So my next question is, if your ODF office tells you you don't need a burn permit and you register one of these burns, and then you want to use the protection but don't have one, what are the implications there?
Yeah, if the district forester decides to waive the requirement for a burn permit, they may do so, and you just want an email documenting that, because it does say specifically burn permits if required. And it does vary across the state, but under statute, under 477, it's pretty specific and says burn permits are required unless waived by the district forester outside fire season. They cannot be waived during fire season, though. That's important to note. So if you are burning during fire season and you ask for a permit and you're denied one, presumably you're being told you cannot burn. If you're told you can burn, but you won't be issued a burn permit, then you might want to press that or ask for some help to get that permit, because it is technically required. But I understand there is a high level of variability across the state. With the implementation of this program, though, I will say that I have seen consistency developing across the state because of the awareness being raised by the CBM program and the pilot. So I'm hoping things will continue moving in that direction where you will see more consistency.
Okay, yep, that's great, Amanda. And yeah, my question was specifically for outside of fire season, as that's when we generally run into that. And just swinging back around to the first part, which is if you upload the permit afterwards, but it's dated the day of your burn, are you covered?
Yeah, and if you email it, that's fine. We understand that you don't necessarily get those when you're putting in your burn in the system. It's more like if you don't get the permit and you burn anyways and you don't have that, then you won't be eligible for the program. But there's no way you're going to be kicked out of being eligible for it. If you got your permit before you burned and you just didn't get it in the system beforehand, you can just email it as needed.
Awesome. Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, for sure. Mike, I think you're next.
So liability, I have a couple questions or concerns or just thoughts. The first is, I was a little surprised that a landowner cannot come back against the CBM for a claim if some of his trees are burned. So I think that's what I read through the PowerPoint. So I think that's a little bit of a surprise. But for example, if the landowner has 10 or 100 nice old growth trees on there and the burn plan says we're going to do what we can to save them, but they don't, the landowner can't come back against the CBM. So that's one thing. The second thing is the liability once it crosses the line. So it's a little unclear, and the reason I bring this up is I don't know if it should be in the curriculum, but because of my experience, I've had to address where burns have gotten across and trespasses were issued. And we had to develop an assessment on the damages, present net worth damages, both on wildfires and prescribed burns. So the landowner came, says, you owe some money. How do you go about determining a value on the loss of timber? So that takes a forester, it takes an economic analysis. In your PowerPoint, it's not clear to me who's going to do that present net worth value assessment. Is it ODF? Are they going to hire a forester? to determine the value of that claim and whether it's going to be single damages or double damages, because most timber trespasses are double damages. And the third question is, in your curriculum, John, that you've developed so far, are we advising CBMs to get personal liability insurance, or is that a good idea? For me, as a consulting forester, I personally have gotten limited liability insurance for various reasons like this. So that's my observation as you of the PowerPoint so far.
Okay, so I'm going to try to track all these. I'm going to start at the beginning. This is all excellent, by the way. Thank you. It is very specific that damages to natural resources are not included within the burn unit. So no, the landowner cannot use this fund to go back to the CBM or to go back and claim for damages. This is for civil liability associated with loss of control, that sort of thing. So it's not really oriented quite so much around the landowner themselves and having some unintended scorch height or something like that. Not saying that's not something that should be dealt with and considered, but that leads to the fact that then, what ODF does is just determine the eligibility criteria for a claim. And that's according to the bullet points that were given. DCBS is the one that does, as I said, that sort of adjustment. Say, let's just game this out. I am the adjacent landowner, CBM next door burns, it escapes and gets onto my land and burns down my barn. So ODF goes through their process. They determine that everything was followed, everything was by the book. It was just a random one-off that the wind switched and they couldn't have controlled that. They didn't do anything wrong. So my claim is valid. DCBS determines how much the barn was worth, not ODF. And I think that gets back to an alternative, say, let's game this out a different direction, and I'm gonna use a different product besides timber. But say I'm a next door neighbor and I have wine grapes and they get smoke tainted by the prescribed burn, I cannot claim for that. That's not an eligible claim. And I think those grapes fall in the same category as the trees. Basically, natural resources agriculture are not eligible for claims, for better or for worse. That's the way it was written. That's the way it was. That's the way it is, I guess. So now, what did I got to two of your things. What was the third one? Oh yeah, should you carry insurance? Okay. So part of the reason for this pilot is to, I guess, provide further incentive to the insurance industry to cover prescribed fire. Because one of the things that has been happening over the last few years is companies who perform these services have been getting their insurance dropped, or the rates have been going up so high that they can't afford it anymore. And so part of the reason that this program was developed was to both develop the comfort of the insurance industry to provide more coverage, knowing that there's a claims fund that can be utilized before a claim goes to them, but also to provide something for those who don't have insurance. So, in some cases, somebody who wants to burn, just having $1 million per occurrence state-backed pilot fund is enough that they feel like they can go ahead and do it. I know when I worked for the federal government and, we talked a lot about having professional liability insurance and having that kind of coverage to basically provide a cushion in the event that something happened and we weren't being supported by the federal government. And we've seen a few cases where that was a good thing for someone. But we don't necessarily, that's not really so much the intent of the program. It's more about getting people some liability coverage, and then that through the certified burn manager program, because it comes with a simple negligence civil liability protection, and then the additional coverage through the pilot program. So I totally get where you're coming from in terms of what that landowner's recourse is for some kind of loss, and certainly similarly, what if on the other side of the fence with regards to somebody else's timber, but those are not covered. Yeah, they're just not covered by the liability pilot. Go ahead, Mike.
So I just want to make it clear, if we light a prescribed fire and it's within prescription and it burns 5 acres of industrial timberland, they cannot come back against the CBM or for a claim. Is that what I heard you say?
Well, they can come back on the CBM. It's that the liability pilot. Yeah, the key is that if it's outside the unit and it's economic damage, then yes, that is covered.
Okay.
It's just that it's, yeah, well. Right. Oh, right. Yeah, smoke damage is specific to agriculture. So when I was talking about the grapes, like that's where I was saying the smoke damage. But I guess if we were to go back and say, but if the burn escaped and burned up the grapes, then that technically is covered, yes.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. That clarifies it.
Mm-hmm.
Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong though, but in the statutes that some organize the CBM program, authorize the CBM program, part of that does say that if there's an escape, well, it just says that the CBM and the landowner and those working on that burn are protected from civil liabilities if they're not shown to be negligent. And so I think in those escapes, there would need to be a show of negligence in order to have a successful claim against the CBM, even if there was economic damages. That doesn't mean that there couldn't be a successful claim to the liability pool. It would be a claim against the CBM specifically. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, there's two different veins here. There's if you're just a CBM and you don't use the liability pilot, then you look at that and that's everybody being protected, but it's simple negligence. So you don't have to show willfulness or maliciousness or anything like that. On the pilot side, that's where, as long as you're not willful, malicious, or negligent, so they add those two words, willful and malicious, but it's or, not and. Then in that case, that's the threshold. But regardless, the CBM liability protection is very general, right? Civil liability, limited civil liability protection, and that would just really have to go through court in order to pan out in terms of what that means. So when people say, are we gross, are we simple? Well, we say generally we have simple negligence. We have a limited liability protection through the CBM program. But until something actually goes into a court and pans out, we have no case law to refer to, so we don't really know. On that claim side, we're kind of going a little bit further than the CBM in the sense that those words like willful and malicious were added, but it has more specificity to what the claims can be. So it's more specific in terms of what kind of claims can be made under the liability pilot, whereas the civil liability under CBM is more general.
And Mike, you ask about what's being taught and relative to insurance. And right now, there's not a requirement in the CBM curriculum to address insurance. And like for me personally, it's been a couple of years, but I looked pretty extensively to see if there was professional liability insurance available for people who were leading burns but not in agency roles. And I didn't find a company out there that was insuring people who didn't have that agency connection, probably because they know that under most of those situations, the agency is going to pick up that bill and they won't actually have to. Things may have changed. But what I do teach in that course is that one, CBM should always be doing a complexity analysis and really getting in there and making sure that they're mitigating risk and using this as a process to have burns that have mitigated risk to the maximum extent possible and avoiding, if you're a CBM and you're doing things that are really risky, don't do that because you're most likely going to be shown negligent in those cases if something does happen. And then along with that, just really making sure that the CBMs are really thoughtful about their interactions with the landowner. So that example you gave of within the burn unit some trees burning up, I'm like that should be part of the discussion with the landowner. If they're asking us to do things that could potentially result in higher mortality levels, then the landowner really needs to be made aware of that. And that's often a misunderstanding on the landowner's part. They think, oh, we can put fire through here and everything's going to be great. And in reality, sometimes it's not going to be great. And it may not be any fault of the burn manager. It's just those conditions are likely to lead to that. And so that's where I warn people when they're doing this that the prescriptions that we write for fuel reduction are pretty easy to come up with. The prescriptions that we write in order to address that complex interaction of ecological factors, those are really hard to do and take a lot of knowledge. And so that's where we need to just really build that capacity for people to understand what there's going to be.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, John. Has anyone here entered a unit into the pilot on the website? Anyone on the committee used it yet?
I'll be working on it this afternoon.
All right, well, feedback welcomed as far as how it goes. I found it to be pretty straightforward, and it's also nice to have a geospatial reference of where burning's happening that's being reported through that system. Any other thoughts or comments?
Just that I've been encouraging people to enter burns in that system, even if they're like, I don't really think I need any more insurance. I'm like, enter them because we want to have lots of successful burns with no claims in that database to make the case to insurance companies that this is a safe thing.
Yeah, and Mike, on the comment about insurance also, I've ended up talking to a number of folks from the insurance industry about this. And interestingly, they've largely been interested in the CBM program as a way to prevent claims from ever having to occur. And so even though, this seems like a great way to entice the insurance industry, most of them are more interested in not ever seeing any claims come into the liability pilot. And so I've talked to some who've said if a claim came through the liability pilot, they would drop the coverage anyways, even if they didn't have a claim made against them because it's a signal of risk that they don't want. That's not true across the board, but it's sort of like the difference between how to stay out of trouble and what happens if you get in trouble. So CBM's about how you stay out of trouble, in theory, anyways, and the liability pilot is about what happens if you get in trouble. And so we're trying to cover both sides here, but our hope is that the more folks we can get through CBM and trained up to be thoughtful and careful about how they do this work, hopefully we never see the liability pilot get used. So far in California, they have not. I don't think they've had a single claim come in. And there's been a lot of burns that have occurred under that pilot. So if nothing else, hopefully it'll just show the due diligence of our work and the fact that we prevent, these things from happening with good risk management. Any other thoughts or questions from the group on this? Okay, well, the next topic is on continuing ed, and this is really a group discussion because right now, the only continuing ed we have identified is the fire ecology series through OSU Extension. And my guess is OSU Extension is going to continue to crank out all kinds of quality continuing ed for folks, but we don't want to assume that's the only source of it. And so I was hoping we could just get some thoughts on this because we need to start making opportunities available on the CBM website for our qualified folks to get their continuing ed. For those who don't know, CBMs they're certified for 5 years, and within that 5-year period of certification, they have to complete 16 hours of continuing ed. And as we've been getting the curriculum rolled out, we've been starting to think about that and identifying opportunities. So just curious, what kinds of trainings should we be linking to the website or opportunities that folks might want to take for their continuing ed, and what's appropriate for continuing ed for CBMs? Aaron, go ahead.
What about NWCG courses like Introduction to Fire Effects or Introduction to or S290, S390, things like that?
I like that idea. Other folks have thoughts on that? Mike?
Uh, when I was looking through the templates and you had a whole list of videos at the end of it. So as a wildland fire, one of the greatest learning tools that I would go through was when things did go wrong. And you probably experienced this if you're a federal firefighter, is different events where there was burnovers. And so I paid particularly attention to events and documents and videos of where things went wrong. And I didn't see any of those videos listed in there. But I know we don't like to talk about the negative, but you can learn a lot of information on where things did go wrong. And so I don't know if they do that on prescribed burns, but that could be a potential continuing education document, is you studied where things did go wrong.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Mike. I'm just thinking about how we could take, because the Lessons Learned Center has just prescribed fire stuff on there. So you can go and find facilitated learning analyses on events in prescribed fire that didn't go well, that resulted in failures of some kind. So the key would be figuring out how to make that into a training. Like maybe that's something we work on with OSU, to just do, a couple hour long session on both near misses and things that went poorly and resulted in adverse outcomes as FLA type things. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Cool. I love that idea. Yeah, that's great. Katie, what do you have?
Yeah, two thoughts. One's right there with Aaron Krikova's comment. Some of us who work in the NWCG world are required to do an annual fire refresher. So having documentation of that, ideally leading towards some of those continuing education hours. In particular, the Nature Conservancy is hosting a prescribed fire specific fire refresher now every year. And I would be open to discussing making that open more broadly to other CBMs that are registered and looking for those hours. And as part of that refresher, we specifically focus on lessons learned from the previous year of prescribed fire implementation. It's big and small, a challenge with notifications or a challenge with the weather prescriptions or whatever it is. So throwing that out as an idea and possibly as an offer to help with this.
Yeah, that's great. I love that idea. Anybody else have thoughts on that or want to respond to anybody that's already spoken?
Not specific to either of those, both great ideas though. One of the requests that I've had is to do a course that delves deeper into prescription development, particularly around those ecological prescriptions and really like sensing or understanding the trade-offs between burning at different times of the years under different moisture conditions, different stages of phenology for different plants, different life cycle timing for animals and things that may be on a burn unit, things of that nature. So that's something that I hope, if things go well, to kind of pull together this winter and be able to do in an online format. So it'll be like Zoom meetings where we come together once a week for 5 weeks or something like that and really kind of talk through some of that stuff and then send people back out with assignments to continue developing their prescriptions. So that's one of the ideas that I had been requested and I thought was a good one. And so I'm going to try to pull it together this winter.
Yeah, that's great, John. And that aligns with what I've been hearing a lot about from folks in terms of interest in continuing ed, and that's burn plan writing in a focused manner, which, the CBM training it follows the burn plan throughout. So it's not like it's not oriented towards that. But, and folks in this group I know have taken the class with the NWCG side of things and learned how to write burn plans in that space. And it's really it used to be a full week. Now it's been brought back into combination with the implementation side. So it's ARCS 300 again, but when it was ARCS 3.1 and then RX 341, 341 was the burn plan writing class. And that whole week spent doing that was really, I think for me, very helpful in my early career development. The ODF burn plan template is a little more simplified and streamlined than the federal, and the process is a little different. But I think having that kind of class for folks, I mean, a 2-day burn plan writing class, that would be their continuing ed would be done for the whole 5 years from just that. And I know a number of people who would do that regardless of the continuing ed credits. They would just do it because they wanted the training. Other thoughts on continuing ed? You know, I started a national networking forum for a certified burn manager program leads across the United States. And the thing that came up for us when we met a couple weeks ago that was fairly consistent was continuing ed. It's a common theme, and it's both tracking it and providing it. So we're still working on that side. We've definitely got it at least to the point of we can easily advertise continuing ed on our website, and we'll do that. So if anyone sees opportunities that they think specific to prescribed fire would be good, and that's, you know, beyond just what we've mentioned here, it could be webinars, you know, that aren't necessarily being hosted here in Oregon, but that would provide information that would be relevant. So we're fairly open-minded, I think, at this point as far as what counts. So, you know, feel free to make suggestions. Go ahead, Mike.
So again, I'll just go back to an earlier comment. Would a certified bird manager just requesting to observe a federal burn be considered continuing ed? Just a simple request. Can I come out and observe your operations? And would that qualify as continuing ed?
I don't know. What do other committee members think?
Well, as I recall, there's the requirement for 16 hours of continuing education plus participation in 3 burns, one of which that has to be like they're the leader of it. So would that be more in line with counting as one of their 3 burns?
Yeah, I mean, my inclination is to say that continuing ed is more of a classroom type training, but then, you know, I hate to say that because I can imagine, say, at a Trex where they do some really focused field training on the burn itself, and I would be hesitant to say that didn't count. I think it's more about how intentional is the learning outcome of the training. So, because I can imagine going to watch a burn and not learning a whole lot, but I could also imagine going to a burn and learning a ton. It just kind of depends on the situation and again, the intent in there being learning outcomes associated with it. Yeah, other thoughts from other members?
I think if you're comfortable with it, you, as the program coordinator, have a lot of latitude in how you choose to count those currently. We don't have a whole bunch of rules outlined, and I like it that way. And so, you know, if somebody said, I went to this burn and it was structured this way, and here's the things I got out of it, you know, I'd be certainly totally comfortable with you saying, oh, yeah, I'm going to count that for X number of hours.
Yeah, I think, you know, one way to approach it, you know, I mean, we are kind of figuring this out here to some extent. We've got stuff that we've already advertised on our website that folks can go through, and then Jacob Putney tracks them, and he gives me a spreadsheet saying, okay, here's all the people that took this who wanted continuing ed for CBM. And that's pretty easy for me to go and plug into my spreadsheet. But if someone were to come to me and say, hey, I did this thing, I think we should just consider that on a case-by-case basis if it's not set up as a training to begin with. And I think, you know, there's a lot of things that could count when it comes to fire training. And so really it's just kind of maybe a little bit of a red face type thing. I mean, I think if someone just came to me and said, yeah, I was on a burn yesterday, can I count that as my continuing ed? I'd probably say, well, I don't know what happened that was worthy of continuing education for you. What did you learn? Aaron, you've got something to add?
I just kind of want to mirror what other people have said. I think it could possibly be okay, but it almost seems more like you're just continuing the practice, not actually continuing your education. And I think it'd be better if we kind of stressed the intention, or at least what I think the intention is, to expand your knowledge and understanding of the subject more broadly. And again, yeah, we are all lifelong students of fire, and we hopefully can learn every something on every burn that we are a part of. And I do think as continuing education, we should be expanding and learning more broadly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hey, Mike, I don't know if your hand was still up or if you had something else. Do you want to add something?
Well, I just would say that for me, uh, the greatest education is observation. Not that, I love classroom exercises, but the greatest time that I've learned is actually implementing or observing or studying actual implementation of projects. So that's just the way I learn. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
I can relate to that. Aaron, you go ahead.
I agree with that as well. And if we already have a requirement that you participate in 3 burns, those 3 burns can't count towards the 16 hours, I would assume, right? Like that has to be separated. We can't have 3 burns count as your 3 burns and count as your 16 hours continuing education, correct?
No, I mean, the 3 burns that you document in field training or that are documented in the field certification book are, those are pre-certification. So once you're certified, then you've got to get your 16 hours after that to keep your certification. So continuing ed is not, it's continuing ed comes after certification. The 3 burns come before.
I thought there was also a requirement that you participate in burns once you're a certified burn
Oh,
manager.
correct. Yes, yes, that's correct. But no, that doesn't count. So maintaining certification through burning and continuing ed don't overlap. No. Yeah, thanks for that clarification. So it would be, again, and I want to echo what Mike said. I feel the same way. Every time I go to a burn, I learn something, and almost especially if I'm watching someone else or other people and I'm not in a role where I'm responsible, because I can kind of take a step back and be a little more relaxed. I think it just gets back to how intentional is that, because I've gone to burns where I wasn't doing anything and I wasn't necessarily engaged in that way. But I think, if we make certain that we're representing the intent, then that will really make the difference. Thoughts from others who might have continuing education ideas or thoughts to share?
I know I already hammered the NWCG, but for us, those of us that are in that system as well, we're required to do the burn boss refresher every 2 years. Be ideal if that would count.
I would like to think so. Yeah. The Burn Boss Refresher is probably one of the better continuing ed opportunities out there. And maybe that would be something to actually create a CBM refresher that just kind of takes some of the high points of the training and talks about any relevant applications that we've been engaging with.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Amanda, and has it more catered towards, private landowners or practitioners. And in the future, if there's a desire for that, I'd be happy to work with someone like John and others to put something like that together.
Yeah, that sounds great. What do you think, John? Hey, Aaron, what do you have?
I was gonna agree strongly with Katie, especially at the beginning, because there's many folks now, the majority who are CBMs who haven't actually taken the CBM course. And in talking with a lot of RXB2s who are now CBMs, many of them don't understand the nuance of the CBM program because it's different. And so I think a lot of them would gain greatly by being informed of more of the details of the CBM program.
So
Yeah,
we'll
you're
have to
actually
have a CBM pre-fresher.
right. Okay. So, and this gets back to something that John and I had, we started working on, I should say he started working on, which was a guidebook for CBMs. And then we put a pause on that because we were doing some updates to the rules, which I'm actually going to talk about here in a minute. And just kind of trying to figure out whether a static document versus continual website updates and also rule updates, would be best. And we are relying on the CBMs going and looking at the rules and familiarizing themselves with the website and getting those nuances mapped themselves. But I think that might be somewhat misguided in that reliance because, as Aaron said, and which I've also encountered as well, that a lot of the folks that are getting grandparented into the program are very well versed in what it means to burn on a federal landscape, but not necessarily what it looks like to work through the state permitting system and working with ODF protection on private lands. And I think that's really wise to bring that up and identify a training opportunity there too, because I mean it really could also bring together the CBMs who didn't go through the training with those who have gone through the training for learning exchange purposes. I mean, you could even call it that, but make it continuing ed. Just call it a learning exchange. And I mean, I could see a ton of good coming out of that because the people who have those RxB2 qualifications have a boatload of experience often, but they just don't have this new landscape they're working in mapped out as well. And then there's those like you, Aaron, who don't have all the background as an RxB2, but you have the landscape mapped out really well because you've been just working in the CBM and private lands and PBA world, and you could help them. So, that kind of exchange and network would be really awesome to develop through continuing ed training. Because, I mean, we can just get people together and work through the council and that kind of thing. But the reality is that what's required of folks in terms of their training will bring them together more than optional, meetings and such. I guess the question is, what would that look like? Or what would we call it? I think pre-fresher, that's an interesting term. Thoughts on what that would look like or what we would call it, or we just want to call it, a refresher that we hope we
I
catch
certainly
people.
could see developing a a course that introduces folks, reminds folks of the differences between, as you say, the RxB2 NWCG route and the kind of private CBM route. And so, there's certain things relative to the statutes, the notification requirements, both for landowners and how you interface with ODF, the prescribed fire liability pool, those kind of things. So there's certain topics that could be kind of plucked out of the existing curriculum and used to provide that introductory basis, and then not have to get really deep into like how you anticipate holding resources because the RxB2s would have a much better handle on that than your typical CBM trainee. So like I could see pulling something out of that and creating a course for that.
Yeah, that sounds good. I really appreciate all these ideas and thoughts from you guys. It's the beauty of this committee is more than what the rules write. Just so you know, I mean, when I go back and look at the rules, it's mostly about investigations and things that we'd actually rather not be doing. But um, being able to talk about how we can make things better and create training opportunities and networking opportunities is huge. So really appreciate this conversation. Do folks have other thoughts to share on this? I'm going to let you talk. Why don't you go ahead, Chad? We do have a public member here in the room, but I'm going to give him a chance to offer up some thoughts real quick. Chad Washington from OFIC.
Just a comment from the peanut gallery here. It feels like if that knowledge exchange were facilitated and able to be documented, that should qualify as continuing education for both parties, because oftentimes when you are teaching something, you are learning through that teaching process as well. The types of questions that come up and how you consider things that may not have been considered until you talk through it feels like continuing education for both the trainer and the trainee.
I guess that means that John's got his continuing ed like done, I don't know how many fold. Um, but yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you learn when you teach, right? And so I think that's actually very much, well, we actually allowed that with Chris Adlam. He got his training through teaching, right? So basically that's how he completed his course. So we've always allowed that, that if you're teaching, you can also count that as training. So I don't see any reason why we wouldn't do that. And hopefully that'll incentivize training delivery even more. Yeah, thanks, Chad. I know we had been limiting our input from the committee, but he helped me out here over on the side with a couple things with rule references, so I figured he earned an opportunity to chime in. That said, if anyone else from the public did not get a chance to comment earlier and has something to say, I won't be unfair in limiting that, even though that's not quite how we had this organized today. So anything else on continuing ed before I move over into looking at the rule revisions? Okay, I think I'm just going to go ahead and actually walk through the documents so you guys can see where the changes got made. I could tell you what they are, but I think if you're like me and you go back to the rules constantly, it's nice to see where they actually changed. So hold on just a second. Let me get that fired up. Okay, and I'm going to share my screen. There we go. There. Okay. Okay. All right. So CBM administrative rules, these are under 629. And I'm just going to walk through these. So one of the primary changes we made was in changing the name of the certification book to field certification. And so here we see the removal of certification book, and then down below we have field certification book, which is specific to operational field training requirements being met. The reason I asked for that change is because certification, certificate, those words were used, but it wasn't clarified that there's a field certification and then a certificate, and those are two different things. The certificate is basically your ID card once you're qualified. And the certification book is specific to what in the NWCG world is called a task book, a position task book. So we call it a field certification book. And then we just clarified the definition of prescribed fire, and that we changed that to the planned application and confinement of fire to the wildland, rangeland, or other vegetative fuels on land selected in advance of that application. And it used to be under this definition down below. So here you'll just see again, field, the word field is added in to make it clear that the certification book is for field certification. And that's basically what you'll see for the most part here. And then we have an ORS reference for anyone who wants to appeal because of being unsuccessful in passing their test. So that's really just cleaning up the language a little bit to refer to that ORS. And then we also have a clarification in the rules around switching from forest land, which was classified forest land, to lands within forest protection districts. Because if you look at maps of Oregon Department of Forestry's protection districts, they include both forest land and ag and range. And so that was specific to that. Go ahead and take a question from John.
So one of the little oddities about this is that typically like ODF has jurisdiction within an eighth of a mile of the edge of their forest protection district. So does CBM apply to that same area, or does CBM specifically apply within the district?
Oh, this is a great question because I have a CBM who wants to burn outside ODF protection within an eighth of a mile, believe it or not. Of course, the entire burn unit does not fall within the eighth of a mile. So that was what made it easier for me to say no. But no, it's that ODF has jurisdictional authority for permitting within that eighth of a mile, but it doesn't mean the CBM applies. What's that? Yeah, it's under jurisdiction and not protection, which is a fine line there. So yeah, unfortunately, CBM does not apply out, but literally this burn I'm talking about is right across the road. And yeah, we're figuring out some workarounds for that. Not for CBM, but it's not going to be a CBM burn, but we're figuring out some ways to get it done under agreements. So, sorry.
No, I just want to make sure that I've got it correct in the curriculum.
Yes.
So I'm going to double check and make sure that I'm phrasing that properly.
Yep. That's the right way to say it. It's within ODF jurisdiction, but not protection. So, yeah, it's a gray area to some extent, I guess. Oh. No, yeah, so to clarify, grazing land, forest land, doesn't matter. Everything within ODF protection is included. And when this legislation was originally passed, it just said forest land. So that got fixed. The next part that was changed was originally the rules were written to say that a person teaching the class had to have 2 years of experience, either teaching adults or 2 years of experience as a practitioner, or in this case, it was said working in the area of expertise. And so we made sure that was both because we don't want people who don't have experience with leading prescribed burns teaching this material. And we also don't want people who just have experience with leading prescribed burns doing it because we need both. So this is ensuring that folks who are putting the class on have both teaching experience as well as experience as a practitioner. And I'm pretty sure that's all that was changed in here, other than continuing references to field certification. And that's it. John, what do you got?
So would the change in who teaches apply? So example, so I host a class and I meet those requirements, but I want to bring in somebody to talk about weather and they're an expert in weather, but they don't have teaching experience. Can I still use them in the class as a guest?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I mean, so what's tricky here is that it's the training provider, right? So in your case, we have an agreement with OSU. So then OSU as a body, yes, does have now if OSU were to send people who didn't have any experience, then we would be reviewing that and determining whether or not that they should be a training provider. And I suppose if you guys had a bunch of turnover, we would be looking at whether or not you had the cadre with the experience required. But no, it's true. Not every single person who's teaching needs this. It's that the training provider needs to provide that. And really, it's just one person leading the course that needs to be meeting that criteria. Those who are going to be doing unit instruction under that person, no. We're not saying that every single person who's teaching a unit for the class has to meet those criteria. It's with whom we have the training provider agreement. So in Mike Beasley's case, because we have an agreement with him as an individual, he meets those criteria for sure. And anyone else we look at entering into an agreement with, they have to meet that criteria as well.
Thank you.
So with this, I would like to open it up for discussion did we miss stuff? Are there things that we should be changing in here or clarifying? One thing I think is worthy of discussion that I want to throw out there is the way in which we define the voluntary nature of the CBM program. So We say CBM is a voluntary program, meaning ODF cannot require a CBM. That's what that means. But I don't know if we're really clear on that. There's been questions brought up about whether or not a CBM has to use the program every time once they're a CBM. The way I read the rules is they do. But if other people have thoughts on this, or you guys want to open it up for discussion, other points in this that we've made or that we might have missed? Are there ways we could clarify the rules further? Go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, Amanda, is there the specific location in rule or statute that you can point to that leads you to believe that a CBM always has to go through the same processes? So, because you mentioned that on Friday at the Prescribed Fire Council meeting too, and
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that I'm looking at the right place. I'm not saying that that isn't a good practice. And I agree with you that voluntary, as I read it, means that you can't enforce it in that, it's not required in order to do burning across the state. But yeah, I was just curious, like where the requirement to utilize the program if you are a CBM comes from.
Okay. Give me just a second to find that while I'm looking for it. Aaron, do you want to chime in, or shall we wait until I find that and go one step at a time?
My question or comment is around the same topic, so we can wait.
Give me just 1 second.
Yeah, sorry, Amanda. Hard to look things up on the fly, I know sometimes.
No, that's fine. I had it found. What I was providing you guys was what we changed, but I need to go dig and find it because I did find it before. So. Okay, so if you look under basically 629, 42, 135, and then I can share my screen again real quick here. Hold on. All right. This is how I read this anyway. So this is under investigation and revocation procedures. And it says in here, a certified burn manager fails to comply with the required actions and activities set forth in OAR 629-42-140. And then it's down here. So here's the required actions where it says a certified burn manager shall prepare a review of a plan, confirm notifications, be on site, etc. So basically what it says is if you don't do those things, then you're subject to investigation and potential revocation. That's my interpretation of that, and that's where I see that. I don't know if let me highlight this really quick so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So that's under C. And then if you go down to 629, 42, 1040, that's where you see those requirements. Aaron.
Yeah, I just feel like we should work to remove that requirement because it seems if this is a voluntary program, like if I'm a CBM, so now I need to write a burn plan and go through all this to burn one pile on my property. That that doesn't seem like the legislature's intent, at least as I understand it. And so I think that needs to be changed.
Well, if burning one pile on your property falls under, outdoor burning, and it's not something that you would need to go through ODF for, then I think that's a different situation than I'm just not going to put my CBM hat on today because I don't feel like it, or I didn't make notifications, or I didn't do certain things, and I just decided not to. So I think it's about how intentional you are moving into it. But I do think it's worth opening this up for discussion. So let's hear from others. Katie.
A couple thoughts or questions. One is, it'll come back to me, hang on. If you are a CBM that are participating in a burn that you are not the leader of, are you still, is there any implications there, right? Like if the person that you're burning with is not a CBM, for example, and you are, then are you responsible for ensuring that the burn that you are on, even if you're not leading it, has followed those rules? And then the second piece I'm trying to think through, and I'll keep pondering on this for the next few minutes, is if this would have implications for NWCG folks specifically who may be leading burns in that capacity, myself in particular, like in my day job, that I would not probably otherwise register. But I would still, follow all of the requirements that NWCG requires me to, which are normally equal to or potentially above that of a certified burn manager. So I definitely think there's more to explore here. And I agree a bit with Aaron in that as a certified burn manager, when I signed up for the program, it wasn't clear at the time that you don't have the ability to take off that hat. So I just naming that as well.
Yeah, so to answer your first question, no, I sure hope not anyways, because I've certainly been on a burn since this program got started that was not being run by a CBM when that could have been occurring. So I don't think that has none of that responsibility falls to you as a CBM who happens to be on a burn. It has to do with who's responsible for the burn. Now, the question about the RxB2 is an interesting one, and you're not the first one to ask me that. And I go back down to a certified burn manager shall. So we look at, they prepare or review a plan before ignitions, they confirm notifications have occurred, they maintain their presence on site during the ignition phase and initial stages of mop-up. I mean, it's all about CBM, right? So I get that technically, you would replace these with RxB2. So, my question has been, what on this list would you not be doing if you were an RxB2? Presumably, you'd be still doing all of it, but you would be using different terms. So maybe the question is to whether or not we alter this to include some of that. I mean, I think it's a really good question, but it also gets to, if you're an RxB2, are you doing that on land where you could be a CBM, or is this where you have to be an RxB2? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear that. One thing that comes to mind specifically is the kind of transfer of liability form at the end of the CBM process. That's not something I would typically do as an RxB2. So I think there may be a couple things that we would want to be a little more clear about.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, that transfer of liability form is that is actually not in a rule. It is in our policy, and it is something we developed out of our rules, but I know it says there's transfer of responsibility sort of mentioned, but it isn't, the form itself is not specified. But yes, I think these are really important points. Amanda.
Yeah, I appreciate all the discussion thus far. And what I'm thinking about, kind of similar to the points that Aaron and then Katie just made, for our members where they've got staff that maybe have gone through the CBM training, and then they are going and doing an operation on federal lands, for instance. And kind of to Katie's point there, it's like, well, you're going to just be burning piles as a part of activity fuel treatment. How, would that require you to go through all of this, right? And like, who then is the neighbor that you're, adjacent landowners, I guess, are, and what does that look like? I mean, the language isn't the same as far as like, district, and just thinking about where certified burn manager applies and doesn't apply, and the reality that many folks that are doing burning, at least in the private contracting space, are not only going to be doing those operations within ODF fire protection. So in those cases, does it, like, yes, I see it a lot of different ways, because yes, if you're calling yourself a certified burn manager, you don't want that to be taken out of context, because now you're not doing the things required. And especially if an insurer is insuring you under the auspices of you doing all of this, right? And so you qualify for a lower risk pool, but then you aren't actually doing all the things, right? Like, there's a lot of reasons, I think, and nuances of why somebody could have a revocation or could have a unique situation, but I don't think that's the same in all cases, right? I think it's going to have to be a case by case scenario. So to say that they shall I mean, I understand that that's the language in here, that they shall do these things, but to me, it seems like they shall do these things when you're operating in a place where CBM is qualified, and where you get protections around CBM. And if you don't do these things, then you do not get the protections of CBM, whether or not you're actually qualified as a CBM. It is sort of where I keep coming back to. Say there was something that happened and you didn't do all the things that are required by CBM, well, you wouldn't get the protections. You wouldn't get, right now, the simple negligence, right? So that's what I keep coming back to. It's going to be on them to do these things and know that they don't get the protections if they don't. But should they get revoked for not doing something that actually isn't required by law, other than the way that we're maybe describing it here? That's where I think that we've got squishiness, and we probably need more discussion, and we're going to be able to have at this meeting. But those are my just like kind of rambling thoughts.
No, those are super good thoughts. I mean, this is why I brought this up, because I don't feel as though it's been entirely clear. And I think when we tell people that the program is voluntary, it is true that it is, in the sense that ODF cannot say a CBM is required. That's very true. Insurance company can say it's required, an employer can say it's required, but we cannot. That said, if you are a CBM, can we do anything if somebody decides they don't want to use it or they want to bypass the system? Is that something we should be tending to or not? John, I'm going to let you go next.
So I'm saying the same thing, but I really do think that a clarification could be made, and I would argue should be made, that here in the section that you're showing on the screen right now, that 629.042.1040 number 1 should really say, when acting in their capacity as a certified burn manager shall. And what that does is it addresses Katie's concern, because I have the same one. What happens when I'm leading a burn that is outside of ODF protection? Technically, I'm not a certified burn manager then, except that I hold that qualification, so that's a gray area. What happens when I'm, working directly with ODF and leading a burn for them, right? And do I do the same things, or is it really something different because there's a different leadership process in place? And if I'm working through the NWCG process, how about if I'm end up doing a burn on BLM property that falls within an ODF protection district, but it's under NWCG? Those are two different things, right? I've got to follow the practices that are appropriate for that land ownership. So I really do think that there needs to be a time when we take off the CBM hat because it's not appropriate. And just like Amanda said, I think that we need to recognize that there's going to be times when maybe people say, I don't want to go through the whole CBM process. I might write a plan for my burn pile, but maybe I'm not going to go jump through all the hoops to do the notifications or ensure the landowner makes those notifications for a single burn pile. And so that means that if it gets away, I don't have that CBM protection, but that was the choice I made. And just that simple clarification in there that I proposed would address that.
Yeah, I hear you. Mike, what do you think?
I think John and Amanda triggered a thought in me when I used to write timber sale contracts for the BLM. I think, John, you were categorizing BLM in two different ways. Sometimes, at least I'm not sure, Amanda, you could help me. On the west side, ONC lands were under the protection of ODF at one time, and I think they still are unless that contract has been canceled.
Yes,
the
there's
east
a
side-
contract in place for ODF protection.
On BLM land?
Yeah.
So under the timber sale contract, we would give the opportunity for the purchaser to go out and mitigate the piles, i.e. burn them. So is that what we're talking about? Is, okay, the purchaser didn't buy out, they could have the option of buying out, and BLM would burn the piles. In the case that the purchaser doesn't buy out, they're responsible for going out and burning the piles. Is that example of what we're talking about right here?
No.
Is purchaser wants to go out, he doesn't have to be a certified burn manager, but it's ODF protected land.
Let me provide you with a different example, Mike. So, and actually this would be a one which Katie could also describe, but so they are a burn boss and they have an agreement with the Forest Service on the Fremont Wainema to do cross-boundary burning and for TNC to lead on the Forest Service side. So if Katie's going to lead a cross-boundary burn under both ODF protection and the Forest Service side, where they're really operating as an RXB2 under their work with TNC and under their agreement with the Fremont Wainema, then they're operating as an RXB2 and not a CBM. And so, but they hold the CBM qualification. So, and Katie, go ahead and just finish it off because I think I set the stage. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, I wasn't intending to finish it off, Amanda, but I was intending to say this exact situation is likely to play out in the next week or two. Up here on the Deschutes where I'm supposed to be burn bossing a land trust property and at the same time a Forest Service piece. But I
Right,
did
so
just
that's-
register it, so who knows?
Yeah, and so in that case, you're going to be, if you do all the required actions under CBM, then, you know, you're covered even when you cross the fence because you've done all the CBM stuff. And hopefully you'll have a CBM trainee for the part that's on private.
Yep, that's the goal.
But Amanda,
But go ahead.
just, I mean, to Mike's comment around piles and the buyout option for BLM and stuff, I mean, I do think that that's a reality that could occur where you've got somebody like a grayback, has a CBM, they got multiple burners with CBMs. I don't know if they do, but let's just play that along, right? But CBMs, they do a lot of burning of piles on Forest Service and BLM land. Say they're doing some pile burning because the purchaser hired them to do that. They didn't take the buyout or the buyout wasn't an option on the sale. Now this grayback have to do all of the CBM stuff, even if even if they don't want to wear that hat, kind of a thing. Or Forest Service, let's say, Forest Service is maybe a little bit more clear cut. I still think maybe BLM is a little bit less, still a little bit sticky maybe on whether or not some of this stuff applies, because it's like under fire, ODF fire protection district, but maybe it won't be in the future. I don't know. But Forest Service for sure isn't, right? So you could have the same sort of thing happen there where you've got a purchaser hires somebody that does a lot of work on private lands as well. They've got CBM. Now, do they have to go through everything just because they're CBM, even though they're really not able to get any of the protections of CBM? So it's like, well, why do all the things? So I do think that those are real realities that the folks I represent, would be going through.
Yeah, I think one thing to clarify too, Mike, is that just because ODF is under contract for protection on BLM land does not mean that's considered to be within an ODF protection district. And so, and that's the thing to be clear on, is that this only applies within ODF protection. So anytime you're outside of that, it's not required because it doesn't apply. So I don't think the purchaser example is quite what we're looking for. But if you were to go take that same example on private industrial land, then it would be a completely different question. And it would be one of, say Grayback's got, I guess to back up though, these certificates are only issued to individuals. To remember, we need to remember that. So Grayback is not a CBM. If Grayback has a CBM, but they don't want to use it, they could have someone else be in charge as a company. And so this gets back to the individuals more so than anything. And it's that once you get your certification, the way the rules read, you don't get to choose whether or not to use it anymore. And what I'm hearing from the committee is that so far nobody has said, well, I think that's the way it should be, and that if you have a certification, you should have to use it. I did ask Kyle Lapham in Washington about this, and he said they're the same as us, that once you get it, you don't get to choose not to use it. And I guess my bigger concern, well, I have sort of dual concerns on both sides. One is I'm concerned that we disincentivize the program by requiring the use of it if you have the certification. I would hate to see people not become certified because they're afraid they'll be required to do it. On the other side, I don't like the idea of having people get certified and do that higher level training and the work that we're trying to get done on the landscape with good effective risk management be an optional thing that people just kind of decide at will, like, well, I don't know, I didn't do my notifications in time, so I guess I'm not going to be a CBM today. I don't know. That's where I have some heartburn with it, that if it's just a matter of, well, I just don't feel like it, then I kind of go, well, if you stepped up and said you wanted to be a CBM, then you should do that, go that extra mile and do things the way that the program teaches. And I'm soliciting feedback from this group because it's become obvious to me that these rules are not entirely clear, or could use a little bit of specificity added to them so that people understand when we say voluntary what that means, and maybe expanding what that means to be beyond what we say right now. Aaron.
I agree with your last comment, and I wanted to speak to what you had said previously, that if I was just burning a pile on my own property, that wouldn't fall under this, but that's not clear to me because it says prior to ignition of a prescribed burn, and then when you scroll up, the definition of a prescribed burn says the application of fire to wildland fuels. So it
does that include a burn pile in your backyard?
I don't know. When I went to OIR 629-044-1005K that defined prescribed burn and fuels, it didn't specify the amount of piles or anything like that. It just said the application of fire to fuels. So it seemed vague to me.
Yeah, agreed.
So I think some clarification might be really valuable. And I agree that we should try and hold ourselves to a higher standard when we're actually applying fire to larger amounts of fuel and controlled burning.
Yeah, yeah. And I really think this is good conversation. It's super important that we daylight this stuff because this is where we figure these things out. But the rest of the world, the rest of the state is where they pan out. And so figuring out how we can best serve the community of practice is really what this is about. I'm just all about trying to bring clarity to the rules because, they can be very much open to interpretation. And so that's what rule revisions are about, is bringing clarity, which we've already done once and we can do again. Each time that has to go through a process. So I don't know how quickly that'll occur, but it's definitely on my list. And I've been taking some notes here, and I'll also be reviewing this whole thing for the content that you guys have brought forward. Yeah, I mean, what else do you guys have? What other thoughts do you have on this? This has been really good, robust conversation. Okay, well, let's see. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to throw the agenda back up real quick so that folks can see that again. If I can find it. Here we go. Chad, for those of you who don't know, works in policy for OFIC. He just noted that wildland fuels are defined as specifically areas where there isn't development. So there's possibly a way we can clarify this through some of the existing rules, but also maybe just through clarifying in language. Well, we're moving right along here, and I thought I threw some stuff in at the very end here for, unless anybody else has other thoughts on the rules and needs for further revisions or clarification. Anything else that you guys have seen in those rules that you think are problematic? Okay. Well, I threw some stuff here as kind of just the updates towards the end. I think we already kind of covered the past course deliveries. It sounds like there's going to be at least 2 coming up this fall, hopefully, maybe even 3. I know that they're going to teach one in Eugene again, and then John was talking about Northeast Oregon. So stay tuned for future course deliveries. I actually there's not a whole lot in the prescribed fire world as far as legislative updates. I threw that in there in case there was anything that came up. But as of right now, we've got, as many people know, the hazard map has been rescinded. And when I was at the Prescribed Fire Council meeting last week, there was a question about other elements of 762 being repealed. And so just to be clear with this group as well, that is not at play. So CBM's not on the table. We're not looking at any of that. So I don't know if anybody has anything that they want to share in that regard, but beyond that, I'll just talk a little bit about ODF's policy process. And does anyone have anything on legislation that they want to share, or other future course deliveries that we don't already know about? Mike, go ahead.
Would you mind letting us know when the next courses are so I can share accordingly with anybody interested down here? Or does the website share those dates? Or
Yeah, every time a course gets planned, we get our website updated with the information and the link to that. So that's one way to find out, but you would have to be going to the website, semi-frequently. So we can share that out with this group. That'd be a good way to get the word out. I appreciate that recommendation. That's great.
Thanks.
John.
And Mike, feel free to reach out to me directly or have Jason reach out. If you guys are really interested in hosting a course down in your neck of the woods, be happy to chat about that.
Well, John, thank you very much. And what comes to mind is that we have a monthly meeting, our partnership with the parties. And what I'd like to do is just probably bring you on for probably a half hour just to explain what you've been through so far and the potential for coming down, or whether we can just do that, say, at a central place. So maybe the first step is just to bring you on for a half hour to explain where we're at and whether there's enough interest. And I'll let you know the next partnership meeting. Will that work for you, John?
You betcha. Just want to help out how I can.
Thank you.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, just to give an update to both of you guys, Jason Pettigrew and I have been in conversation about this over the course of the springtime, and he ended up deciding to hold off for the time being. I think, though, that was based on concern that he didn't have enough local base of experience and interest, like as in people being ready for the leadership component. Because it's a common misconception that the CBM training program is for entry-level practitioners, and it is not. It's for folks who have some experience who want to become leaders. And I think when that became very clear, he already knew that, but that became clear to others that there was a step back, that maybe they needed more learn and burn type events or things to get people experience before they went through the leadership training. But knowing that we have people that will travel throughout the state to go to this training, I think I can go back to him and say, hey, I bet that just by hosting it, you'll get people coming from outside to populate the class, and you won't feel as though it might not be worth it to put it on. And Mike, you feel free to have that same conversation with Jason yourself if you want. Just let him know we talked, and I'll also follow up with him so he's aware. Because I really do think bringing the class to that part of the state would be very valuable because of all the good work that's happening down there. It'd be good for others aside from how much local demand there might actually be.
Yeah, I understand. I just don't want to go through all that effort if you might get more private landowners than anyone, and they're a different audience than someone that wants to be CBM. So it might be a shorter course of something, John and Amanda, than a full CBM. So we really need to talk about it amongst the partnership before we commit. I don't want to bring down for 4 days if you only have 2 in the class. So it's just not worth it. So more to come.
Yeah, for sure. And I trust you guys will have those conversations and figure it out. But let me know how I can help and support this, and also get the word out to others who want to get the training. The centralized locations like Eugene and Sisters, are pretty easy for folks to get to from other parts of the state. But when you start getting out to the further corners, I know it's a little more of a drive for folks and may disincentivize some of that more remote participation too. So we'll want to make sure we do it based on your readiness and comfort there. I think I'll go ahead and move into giving you guys some updates on where ODF is at with developing prescribed fire policy. And I'll maybe back up a little bit to talk about CBM policy. So we developed the rules for CBM, and then we made policy for that shortly thereafter. And then we got a wildfire policy staff person who immediately jumped into prescribed fire policy development for ODF, which is fabulous. The department has needed this for quite some time. And that's tiered to training manual development as well. And then that's also tiered to prescribed fire manual development. So policy for CBM, it's done and signed. Policy for prescribed fire is done, but not signed. It's about to cross the finish line. And then the manual development for prescribed fire is now in process. And that is a team effort. Folks from districts across the state are involved. So it's not a Salem project. This is a statewide project with experts all over the place providing their input. And it's a really fun group. Jason Pettigrew, of course, is a part of it. And we are hoping to have the manual wrapped up before fire season. We're trying, that's our goal, because once fire season kicks in, we won't get anything done on it until later in the fall. And so that's the goal. We'll see how it goes. It's moving along quite well. And then after that, we will actually circle back to CBM and create a manual for CBM, because the way that's been going has mostly been me figuring it out based on the rules and the policy that we developed. And so now I need to put all that stuff into a manual and then kind of vet it and see where we might make some changes, how we could improve administration of the program. This group that that Kyle Lapham and I formed, that's going to be meeting monthly now, this forum for certified burn manager programs, has really opened my eyes to how highly variable these programs are across the nation. Some of them, they don't have much at all codified, and others that are highly codified and organized. In Texas, it's a 5-day class. You have to have $2 million insurance to be a CBM there. So it's completely wildly different. You know, when Mike was asking about insurance requirements here in Oregon or how we were handling that, there's just none really other than the liability pilot. But then you go to Texas where you can't even have your certification unless you can prove that you have the insurance to back it up. So one of my questions in that case was, what would incentivize you to even be a CBM there? And that for them, it's that they get to burn during burn bans. So each state is different, and I'm actually really happy that I formed this group and I'm getting feedback from them before we create our manual, because I'll probably change my practices, and then that manual will hopefully reflect changes for the better as a result. So stay tuned, because I will share that out with you guys when it's all ready. It's exciting because ODF has operated on a highly variable scale when it comes to prescribed fire, everything from saying we don't do any prescribed fire to we lead prescribed fires on behalf of the Umatilla tribe. I've seen all of those things since coming here. And so having policy and manual to be consistent and to guide our work is super important. In addition to having training manual that recognizes prescribed fire qualification. So when I got here, they weren't represented anywhere in our system. So we had to populate our system with all the information for prescribed fire qualifications to be represented. So we're essentially just following the NWCG 310-1 requirements for within. And that's something to note that I think most of you guys already know this, but ODF does not carry certified burn manager. I mean, I have it, but it's for my work outside of my scope of employment. Within my scope of employment, then I operate as a type 2 burn boss. So we follow NWCG more or less. I don't say we follow it strictly because we don't have a seat at that table as a department. So we don't have influence over it. And so therefore, we don't like to say we follow it exactly. We follow our version of it. And there will be slight differences. But with the prescribed fire qualifications, they're all pretty much following what you would expect to see there. And beyond that, we are really just focused on what kind of nuts and bolts of our work do we want to attend to in terms of burning with partners. We're kind of a different entity in that with the federal side, crossing the fence to burn with others is usually requires an agreement. There's other things that need to come into play, and we have a little bit more flexibility in the sense that, say, we can go burn under a CBM, and that's not necessarily NWCG, but if we lead a burn, then we're going to follow our own requirements for ourselves. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to say others have to be NWCG to be there. So these are the things that we're trying to get sorted out and represented in our manual, so we have really good, clear direction for our folks. Because right now, I mean, I'm sure you guys experience this where they're like, I don't know what we're allowed to do. Or, or districts kind of make their own requirements, or they set their own thresholds. And the districts are always going to have that authority to say yes or no about whether or not their folks are participating in prescribed burns or whether or not they allow them on their districts. That doesn't really change with any of this, but it does provide that good, solid guidance and manual direction. And, there's some people that work for ODF that are comfortable with the system we have in place, which is more open-ended, and others who really want to see that direction. So we're kind of knitting those together to make sensible manuals and consistency, but also not be so restrictive or tight that we don't allow ourselves to participate on a variety of landscapes and burning. So that should give you an idea of where that's at. And hopefully by the next meeting, I'll be able to share a lot more of that stuff in detail with you guys. So that's what I've got for today. But is there anything we missed or any topics of conversation we want to cover in this last 12 minutes that we have left? I guess we covered it pretty well, huh? Well, I know I've got some follow-up to do in just kind of taking another look at what the revision cycle might look like for cracking open CBM again. And then we'll be looking at continuing education and kind of broadening our horizons on what that includes. I'm thinking more broadly like, wow, what kind of classes could I put on that then would also count? Hopefully you guys are thinking that way too. And otherwise, I think that's all I've got. It's exciting to see how far this program's come in such a short amount of time. And it's because of people like you guys here in this group. So I just want to tell you all thank you for engaging and being a part of this. It wouldn't be where it's at if it weren't for all of you.
You as well, Amanda. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.